85 new residents step off buses and trains into this sprawling urban center every single hour. That metric equates to more than 2,000 people daily adding their ambitions to an already saturated peninsula. Cinematic fog over rooftops obscures the true scale of a mega-settlement that has completely defied traditional civic engineering limits. Looking out from a helicopter aerial over city districts, the density immediately overwhelms the senses. The numbers are completely staggering. By the year 2100, demographers predict this coastal behemoth will become the most populous location on Earth, holding over 80 million human beings. Yet the origins of Lagos, Nigeria stretch back to a humble 15th century Awari fishing camp known simply as Eko. Golden hour drone shots today reveal little of the original mangroves where early settlers sought refuge from regional warfare. Oberadu, the first crowned king, established a permanent monarchy on a tiny landmass surrounded by treacherous lagoons. It was an island fortress. The geography provided unparalleled defense against inland invasions while offering a natural maritime gateway to the Atlantic Ocean. Navigating these waters required deep indigenous knowledge, an asset that quickly turned the small camp into an essential trading hub. Trade eventually attracted European explorers, and with them came a dark era of transatlantic exploitation and eventual brutal colonial rule. Historical records detail how vast quantities of palm oil and spices flowed continuously through these highly guarded, tightly restricted maritime checkpoints. The theft was completely brazen. Local leaders watched helplessly as traditional fishing economies were systematically dismantled to feed an insatiable global capitalist trade machine. In 1861, British gunboats enforced the formal annexation of the territory, forever altering its architectural trajectory and spatial organization. Planners cleared charred wooden ruins to make way for steel-framed apartments, wide asphalt boulevards, and a towering lighthouse near the waterfront promenade. Herbert Macaulay, a pioneering civil engineer and passionate nationalist, surveyed these rapidly expanding boundaries during the early 20th century. Colonial powers demanded permanent structures. He witnessed dock workers hauling heavy exports as cargo ships in harbor demanded increasingly robust docking facilities and widened channels. Cement trucks soon replaced manual laborers as foreign engineers constructed deepwater wharves to funnel immense resources out of the continent. This island outpost began merging with the mainland as a relentless tide hitting ancient seawall defenses threatened the encroaching coastal settlements. By the 1960s, national independence sparked an explosion of domestic migration that caught the remaining administrative planners completely unprepared. Everything changed at breakneck speed. Early historical plans failed to anticipate a population that would quickly surge past 1 million highly determined and resourceful inhabitants. Facing severe gridlock and catastrophic overcrowding, local leadership authorized one of the most aggressive infrastructure expansions in West African history. First military Governor Mobalaji Johnson spearheaded an unprecedented era of concrete and steel during the late 1970s oil boom. Highway cloverleafs began tearing through historic neighborhoods to directly connect the disconnected archipelagos of Victoria Island, Ikoyi, and the mainland. A massive crisis was brewing. Operating heavy machinery became a 24/7 endeavor, as skyline cranes heavily dominated the increasingly humid, exhaust-filled horizon. Architects pointing at models envisioned a futuristic capital, pouring millions of petrodollars into cultural landmarks like the iconic National Theatre. This brutalist masterpiece required 30,000 tons of crushed stone and featured an exterior shaped uniquely like a military peaked hat. However, the true crown jewel of this chaotic era was undeniably the monumental Third Mainland Bridge, successfully completed in 1990. The scale was absolutely unprecedented. Stretching an unbelievable 11.8 kilometers across the lagoon, it demanded 30 million tons of poured concrete to construct. Construction crews battled intense tropical heat, deadly malarial mosquitoes, and highly unpredictable tidal shifts during the grueling multi-year assembly process. Specialized heavy lifting ships were deployed to painstakingly position massive precast concrete bridge segments precisely into their designated lagoon positions. Engineers drove 8,500 steel piles deep into the unstable silt just to keep the highway deck suspended above the dark waters. Bridge builders faced incredible challenges. Aerials captured by local news stations showed the longest bridge in Africa, serving as a vital circulatory artery for a frantic metropolis. Commuters flooded across the span daily, yet even this monumental engineering achievement could not outpace the relentless and overwhelming demographic surge. Urban density reached a breaking point, forcing millions into massive informal settlements built directly over the polluted lagoon water. Government officials realized that traditional expansion was impossible, prompting a radical shift toward reclaiming territory directly from the turbulent ocean. Land simply vanished beneath them. Developer Ronald Chagoury initiated the Eko Atlantic project in 2006, an audacious private plan to construct an entirely new financial district. Massive dredging ships sucked sand from the seafloor, systematically depositing 10 million square meters of new artificial land off the coast of Victoria Island. To completely protect this artificial peninsula, workers erected the Great Wall of Lagos, a towering marine defense built with 100,000 individual concrete armor blocks. Welding steel beams atop this newly birthed soil, foreign and domestic contractors began actively raising a modern skyline meant to visually rival Dubai. It halts the raging Atlantic. Lagos construction site aerial footage highlights the stark visual contrast between these gleaming glass monoliths and the dense chaotic mainland directly adjacent. Concrete mixers worked continuously as 15 new commercial skyscrapers rose simultaneously across the glittering multi-billion-dollar coastal corporate enclave. Massive underground storm drains, capable of redirecting millions of gallons of torrential rainwater, were secretly integrated beneath the pristine, palm-lined boulevards. Security checkpoints guarded the perimeter, effectively creating a heavily militarized spatial divide between the affluent newly formed island and the struggling mainland. Billions of dollars were invested. Yet this massive injection of global capital only addressed a fraction of the overarching spatial deficit severely plaguing the wider metropolitan territory. The original historical coastline, once a muddy edge lined with wooden fishing canoes, transformed into a hardened perimeter of interlocking concrete tetrapods. Giant container cranes continuously unloaded building materials from global maritime suppliers just to feed the insatiable appetite of the busy local contractors. Beneath the shiny surface of this relentless vertical push lies a shadow network of neglected and heavily contested underground infrastructure. The city literally ate concrete. Decades of totally unregulated growth severely compromised the subterranean drainage systems, turning rainy neon streets into sudden, extremely treacherous flash flood zones. While bright surface-level megaprojects capture global media attention, the hidden underground pipes meant to safely carry runoff often choke on discarded plastic debris. Subterranean fiber optics silently snake beneath cracked pavements, bypassing the official utility conduits entirely to provide high-speed internet to tech startups in Yaba. Unlicensed cable layers work under the cover of darkness, stringing highly valuable data wires across extremely dangerous high-voltage electrical distribution poles. Electricity here is pure luxury. This chaotic physical web visually represents the incredible grassroots determination of young tech entrepreneurs fighting to heavily participate in the global digital economy. The stark contrast between ultra-fast digital speeds and crawling physical vehicular traffic perfectly encapsulates the deep paradox of modern West African urbanization. Meanwhile, right on the lagoon's surface, another totally hidden layer exists within the sprawling floating slum of Makoko, an unrecognized watery district. Here, vulnerable residents built homes on wooden stilts over dark water, creating an intricate canal system completely absent from any official Lagos urban planning map. It is a phantom city. Architect Kunle Ademi recognized the incredible genius of this localized indigenous engineering, famously designing a functional floating school utilizing plastic barrels for reliable buoyancy. Though the original prototype structure collapsed during a severe rainstorm, the architectural blueprints proved that localized amphibious urban design holds legitimate future potential. Navigating through Makoko requires an intimate understanding of shifting tides, unseen sandbars, and the deeply entrenched social hierarchies controlling specific watery transit avenues. This massive informal ecosystem operates squarely parallel to the official corporate economy, safely moving timber, fresh fish, and fuel completely outside the taxation net. Millions survive in the shadows. Digging deeper beneath the primary central business district, one quietly finds abandoned foundations of 1980s tower blocks whose funding mysteriously and permanently vanished. These massive concrete stumps serve as gloomy, silent reminders of a chaotic era plagued by volatile military regimes and rapid economic boom and bust cycles. Today, oblivious pedestrians crossing busy intersection points barely notice the rusting steel rebar protruding from these completely forgotten flooded subterranean bank vaults. Realizing that a totally unregulated megalopolis is fundamentally economically unsustainable, recent administrative governments have desperately attempted to formalize the chaotic transit networks. Nothing remains empty for long. Former Governor Babatunde Fashola boldly initiated massive modern transit reforms, heavily carving dedicated public bus lanes out of the famously congested arterial roadways. His ambitious administration completely understood that moving people efficiently was the absolute only viable way to quickly prevent total economic paralysis within the commercial capital. A sleek subway train arriving at station terminals finally became an operational reality with the incredibly long-delayed governmental inauguration of the Lagos Blue Line. Costing an estimated $1.5 billion, this elevated and at-grade electric light rail system completely bypasses the globally infamous daily traffic jams. This was a historic breakthrough. Transportation planners strategically routed subway tunnels above ground wherever physically possible, utilizing massive concrete viaducts to keep the electric trains clear of severe seasonal flooding. Brightly painted blue carriages quietly glide along heavily reinforced concrete tracks, visually replacing the highly polluting, chaotic yellow minibuses known locally as /Danfo's /. Lagos Financial District crowd dynamics shift as commercial developers are aggressively purchasing surrounding properties, eagerly anticipating massive real estate valuations heavily driven by transit-oriented regional zoning policies. Bright scaffolding towers continue to heavily wrap around brand new mixed-use developments, clearly signaling a massive civic pivot toward hyperdense, self-contained smart city neighborhoods. The transit lines generate wealth. Smart city infrastructure initiatives are slowly replacing ancient analog systems with heavily networked, artificially intelligent traffic management sensor grids. Urban planners monitor massive digital dashboards displaying live, completely real-time geographic data tracking vehicular flows across the major island bridges. These high-tech command centers perfectly illustrate a desperate municipal desire to scientifically control a metropolis that historically inherently resists control. International venture capitalists constantly tour these newly modernized districts, furiously taking notes on the rapidly emerging West African consumer demographics. The modernization is truly relentless. Rising global sea levels pose an acute existential threat to this specific low-lying vulnerable coastline, forcing structural engineers to constantly elevate defensive seawalls and commercial foundations. A fast drone flying through clouds high above the peninsula visually reveals a stark existential battlefield, where sheer human ingenuity violently fights a relentless oceanic advance. Cinematic time-lapse traffic lights frantically pulse below, as millions of bright headlights rapidly trace the concrete arteries of a colossal regional economy that aggressively refuses to ever slow down. A towering Lagos Stock Exchange building exterior shot dynamically displays scrolling financial tickers publicly confirming Nigeria's ironclad position as a dominant continental corporate economic powerhouse. Climate change remains an enemy. Future generations will study this exact geographic location to definitively understand how massive human populations adapted to severe coastal restrictions. Architectural universities already analyze the unique structural compromises engineered here as the absolute baseline for impending 22nd century global urban development. The chaotic energy permeating these crowded streets is not a sign of civic failure, but rather a profound engine of survival. Every single poured concrete pillar and heavily reinforced seawall loudly broadcasts an unyielding human refusal to surrender to the encroaching tides. The metropolis will eternally adapt. Looking down upon this staggering, endless expanse of dense concrete, murky water, and gleaming steel, the true profound nature of pure urban resilience becomes undeniably, brutally clear. What historically began as an isolated, muddy island refuge has rapidly mutated into the ultimate extreme laboratory for 21st century human survival and radical architectural adaptation. The sheer collective willpower required to simply keep this massive maritime giant functioning daily completely defies conventional civic logic, brilliantly outmaneuvering crumbling inherited infrastructure and harsh natural borders. Nowhere else on the entire Earth does a localized society push so violently against physical geographical limits while simultaneously generating such immense, world-changing cultural and economic energy. It is a true marvel. This spectacular coastal giant boldly stands as both a monumental historical warning and a blazing beacon for the incredibly complex impending future of all global megacities.